Hi there, my name's Alex. Some of you may know me as Supermarket Comic Bro, the lovable rascal. So, last year was the debut of a short film that I helped work on called Millie. It was made by the digital animation class, something like that, at the University of Colorado, Denver. And to say that it had a troubled production would be a bit of an understatement. It wasn't something that went through the same level of development hell as, say, Duke Nukem Forever, but it was still something that production was troubled. And since I don't think any of my classmates or peers are ever going to give any information on it, I thought I would. Now you'll have to excuse me, this is being done completely ad-libbed, so I do have some notes here, so I'll be looking at them from time to time, but otherwise it's just stuff I remember. I'm gonna try to edit the video so that it's not so awkward. So if there's any jump cuts, that's hopefully the most awkward it will get. So, with all that said, let's begin. So, pretty much the best place to start would be with the story. Normally with the DAC, what they do is they do adaptations of different books. Their most notorious being an adaptation of I Need My Monster. This one, we were originally going to do an adaptation. The very first book we chose, I don't remember the title. It was about this little girl who was a princess and her teddy bear, and they dealt with a monster under the bed. It's actually a really funny story, and I think it would have been really fun to see animated, but it didn't happen. The second one, and I'm glad we didn't go with this, was this story that would have basically just been The Boy Who Cried Wolf, but with dinosaurs. And that just sounded super lame. I don't know why it happened, but eventually the professors decided that they'd just let us come up with our own original story. And we had some, honestly, pretty cool ideas. I don't remember all of them. One that I remember was basically your typical knight defeats dragon and saves princess story, except it would have been revealed that the knight was actually a woman, and the princess was just as happy to be romantically involved with the knight. Yeah, I think that could have been a good story. Another one was this social commentary with bug people. It's something kind of like Zootopia. We didn't get very far. This was just a pitch. But we thought about maybe moths and butterflies, and as it turns out, the bad guy is actually one of the discriminated bugs who is encouraging this discrimination. I don't think I'm doing it justice, but like I said, this was about 2 years ago that we even discussed the idea. The final idea that was pitched that day, and the one that stood out and we sort of adapted, it was by the other Alex in the program. Really nice guy. Kind of shy. But his story was that this young man buys his dream home, and it turns out that it's haunted. And so he decides to call in totally not Ghostbusters and psychics and people like that who try to exorcise the ghost, but they're unsuccessful, and they keep damaging his house. And eventually he discovers that the ghost is not malicious and is just as lonely as he is, so he befriends the ghost and realizes that it wasn't the house he was after, it was companionship. And it ends with him sitting with the ghost, drinking tea or something like that. And I think it was because of that we really gravitated towards that story, because it definitely had that defining image. Seeing the guy sitting with the ghost, showing that they've become friends after all that's happened, that was going to be the thing that defined that story. So that was winter 2017, I want to say. Let's see, because we basically worked on the story for 2019. So after Christmas, winter break, for the first semester of 2019, we then broke into the story division in the, I guess you could say, the art direction. But what we did in the story division was we tried to revise the idea. I guess that someone, maybe one of the professors, didn't think that the story would work well on its own. And so we tried to come up with some other ideas. We spent several weeks, maybe even a month, trying to decide what to do, and I don't know why. Some of the ideas we had were maybe one where the ghost is actually malicious, and my friend Sydney and I both had an idea for a Hansel and Gretel sort of story, which our director, he did not like that idea. I don't know why. Yes, he felt it deviated too much from the original idea. Another idea we had was maybe the ghost is actually an animal, specifically a ghost. It's a ghost dog. And we had an idea where maybe this young woman finds this ghost dog and it protects her from her abusive ex. Again, we considered the possibility that maybe it was a woman. If I may go off on that tangent, I like the idea because it shows that there are abusive lesbian relationships, but on the other hand, I think it might be a bad time to show negative portrayals of the LGBT community. So I think if we'd gone with the idea, we would have really had to make it work, and there were a lot of LGBT people in that program, myself somewhat included, demisexual for those interested. One of the ideas I came up with that I think could have been fun, and I may have to work on it myself, it's about a woman scientist who lives with a ghost dog and tries to build a robotic suit for the dog so that rather than just phasing through her when it jumps up, it can actually basically have a physical form again. Original idea, do not steal. So our final idea basically came to something like this. A phone-addicted teen is sent to his aunt's house over the summer, and she lives in a tourist shop. I don't remember when we got to the idea it would take place in New Orleans, but that's where he would live. He would be staying with his aunt in New Orleans, who runs a tourist shop for New Orleans souvenirs. And, there he would meet a ghost in the attic. And the idea was seemingly always that it was a human boy and a ghost girl. I'm not quite sure why, but I'm not complaining. So he goes there, and she helps him break out of his shell and stop being so addicted to technology. He would have bonded with his aunt more, and when he got home, he would try to befriend some of the kids in his neighborhood. So, nothing too original, just a nice, wholesome story about someone overcoming an addiction to technology and social anxiety. I think that's a great story. It's one that I could probably use myself. So that was the final idea, I guess you could say. That was our basic idea. Another fun thing about it, I guess because we want a bit more diversity, we decided to go with a predominantly black cast. And yes, I'm using the term black because I think that African American is a little too American-centric. I mean, it makes sense in this one, the characters were meant to be American, but I digress. So one of the things that I actually do take responsibility for is that the main character was going to be a bit nerdy, and I decided that maybe calling him Andre after Andre the Black Nerd would be a fun little shout-out. For some reason, one of the guys in the program thought it was spelled with an I, so for some reason it's Andre with an I. I don't get it. So after we kind of had this finalized idea, I think that's when a lot of the problems really started. Because the director, very nice man, I mean no ill will towards him, he always seemed like he wanted what was best for us, and I know he wanted to make it as good as possible, but I just don't think that he really understood how we could make it the best we could, despite his experience. So one of the things that he constantly tried to enforce was the hero's journey. We would have meetings where all we do is watch videos about the hero's journey. And a couple months ago, it's really what inspired me to make this video. I was watching this YouTube channel called Terrible Writing Advice, where the guy facetiously gives, as the title suggests, terrible writing advice, because he basically is saying, you see what I'm saying here? Don't do any of it. And one of the things he talked about was the hero's journey. Basically, it's the idea that this ordinary person is given a call to adventure, they refuse it, and then they answer it anyway, and they go through trials and tribulations. Then eventually they bring whatever they've acquired back to their regular life, or as regular their life can be now that they're the hero. And there's a lot of stories, a lot of popular stories that use this format. Star Wars A New Hope is the most iconic example, though I've also seen ones like Wizard of Oz or Harry Potter, stuff like that. Popular stuff. And one of the things the video talked about, the guy referred to it as the hero's journey template, where people try to enforce the idea of the hero's journey in their story instead of just letting it develop naturally. And I think that's basically what happened with our story. The director was adamant that he wanted it to be a hero's journey story, and not just, little elements like the stuff I mentioned, but other very specific ones like the meeting of the goddess, the bringing the gift back to their home, the trials and tribulations. Very, very specific stuff that he just desperately wanted, and in thinking about it after watching the video, I think that he, like so many others who tried to use the hero's template, was thinking, if we make this short like Star Wars or Wizard of Oz, then it will be as good as Star Wars or Wizard of Oz. And that's not necessarily the case, I don't think. I think that you can argue that a lot of good movies use that template, but I think it would be hard to say that all good movies are based on that template. I think a good one that comes to mind is the movie Aragon, basically just A New Hope, but with dragons. That movie tried to be a hero's journey, and the thing most people remember it for nowadays is it wasn't a very good movie. I've never seen it, I've just seen reviews of it, so hell do I know. The director was also the one who really pushed for the New Orleans vibe. He even took pictures when he was visiting New Orleans to give us a feel for the landscape and the architecture. And I'll be getting to this later, but even though we spend so much time focusing on this New Orleans stuff, it's nowhere in the short. So basically, because of all the New Orleans stuff, all the hero's journey stuff, he was really pushing for us to make it something long, like 10 to 15 minutes. And I think the end result is not even 5 minutes long, and that's because, and this is a common misconception, animation takes a long, long time to make. Even something like computer animation. Well, you don't have to redraw everything like you would with traditional hand-drawn animation. You do have to keep constant control over how things are moving, how things look, and depending on the frame rate and how detailed the models, the textures, how many models, how many textures, depending on a lot of factors, it can take a long time to render just one image. Like, it can take upwards of an hour just to make one single 1080 by 1920 image. Now, again, depending on the frame rate, which is generally, I think, around 24 frames per second, it depends. So multiply an hour or so by 24, you've wasted a full day just rendering 1 second of animation. So in order to actually get the story rendered as we want it to be, we had to tell the director this, we could not make the story as long as we had been planning to because we did not have the time left. I think we only had maybe 45 days left to render, and that's not a whole lot of time. So we had to cut the story down to its bare minimum, which was basically the story that we got. The kid meets the ghost, the kid breaks his phone, the kid learns that the ghost was a human girl who died of illness, guy befriends the ghost. Yeah, and it lost a lot of the heart because we tried so hard to make it more than what it was. And the director and I guess ourselves lost focus on how we were going to tell the story, not just why. So yeah, that was the problem with the story stuff. So the next thing I'd like to talk about are the assets that we created. Now, for those of you who don't know in animation, assets are basically the models. Like, this would be an asset. I don't know whether it would be a foreground object, a background object, a main object. Basically, anything that has to be physically created in the computer, any kind of object or person. Basically, any nouns are assets. Now, after the story and art direction division of class was done, the next semester, which will have been the fall 2019 semester, we then broke into the modeling stuff and other such stuff. It was a messy production, so it's hard to keep track of everything, and I'll get to why that was in a bit, but one of the things that we did when we were doing assets is we broke up into about 5 rooms that would have been important for the story. One was Andre's room, one was the shop that the aunt ran, one was the attic, one was, I guess, the hallway between the attic and the store, and there was one other one. It was the street outside the store, the streets of New Orleans. And we put a lot of effort into building these places. I was one of the people lucky enough to work on the attic, and I'll explain why I was lucky. So, I was working on the attic, and basically we were just told to populate it with stuff. And so we made a lot of old-looking stuff. We made chairs, we made picture frames, I made a suitcase, and fun fact, that is the only thing that I made that you can actually see in the animation. You have to look really closely in the background. It's this old, dusty-looking traveling suitcase. It's got gold-looking locks on it or something. Not important. We also worked on different toys that would have been Millie the Ghost's toys when she was alive. We had a lava lamp and other stuff that was from the 70s. I was someone who modeled an old Mr. Potato Head with the pipe that he lost before Toy Story. There were other things that were created. There was a lot of stuff for the store. One of the most beloved by the animators was this giant sassy-looking crocodile wearing this gaudy Mardi Gras outfit, and there was a scene where Andre's looking at his phone, bumps into it, looks up, and is horrified by this smiling gator that almost falls down on him. And yeah, that's another thing that we lost because of wasted time. But at some point, I guess this was also a sign of how things were going. At one point, we walk in on a Friday, and we learned that 2 of the rooms are being cut due to time limitations. In fact, that sums up a lot of what happened. Cut due to time limitations. For instance, Andre's parents were removed, so due to time limitations, so it basically became him living with his aunt, so I guess he's Spider-Man. I was even thinking of making a joking drawing where Andre is dressed up wearing a Spider-Man outfit. Never went anywhere, though. That reminds me, it's not in my notes. I'll have to bring up working on concept art later. But because the rooms were cut, a lot of the models from them were imported, so for people who had been working on models in the attic, it was... I'm not sure if I can say for everyone it was upsetting, but basically to spend so much time working on these models, to have someone else go, well, we need to put these objects from another room somewhere so that the people who worked on them don't feel like their time's being wasted. Yeah, it's discouraging. So yeah, we had a lot of models imported, we had a lot of models ignored, pretty much all of the New Orleans themed objects were lost, and at this point it was still the store that Andre was living in with his aunt and with Millie. So it was basically down to 3 rooms. The store, the attic, and maybe the streets. So after some point, I don't know when, we basically had to say, sorry, we can't do the store anymore. So it was basically just down to the attic, some part of the hallway, Andre, and Millie. The aunt was gone, the customers from the store were gone, the streets were gone. Basically, it was a bottle episode. We only needed 1 room, and I'm counting the little side area of the attic because that was built while the attic was being created. And it's a little dinky hallway and our 2 main characters, our 2 only characters at this point. So yeah, a lot of time and energy was completely wasted because of poor time management. But that's it for talking about assets. So, one part I'd also like to discuss just for a little bit of levity is the concept art that we worked on. Now, I love drawing. I draw literally every day, and I mean literally. Not a day goes by where I'm not scribbling something down. Basically, what happened was, along with the art direction people finding good New Orleans stuff to work on, part of the story team was also working on what do these characters look like, and that was something I helped with. Like I said, we want Andre to be black, and we want him to be nerdy, so one of the designs I worked on, I made a design kinda based on one of my characters, his black and also kinda nerdy, and also Vince's big brother Chad from Recess. I made a design that was kinda the 2 of them combined. And I also made 2 versions of that version of Andre. One where he's wearing a t-shirt with some kind of nerdy logo on it, and one where he's wearing suspenders and a bow tie. And one person summed up as saying, we need to decide whether his nerdiness is more like Sheldon Cooper or Steve Urkel. And I just like that comment. So one of the things we talked about with the aunt is that we want her to be more of a heavy-set woman. Basically, we want her to seem very warm and inviting, that she would give Andre these big hugs, and her nickname for him will have been Squishy. I don't know why, it just stuck. I don't know who came up with it, but along with those 3, we also talked about possibility of a 4th character, this redhead girl who lived next door to Andre at his parents' house. And one of the designs I gave her, which was inspired by one of the concept arts I did before we finalized that Andre would be a black nerd, was this redhead girl with curly hair, and she also had those cute little cat ear headphones. And someone commented that they really liked it because it gave her a lot of personality without really saying too much. Unfortunately, like so many other characters and such, that was lost forever. I also tried to push for giving Andre glasses. I think that could have worked, but it's not my call. Andre being nerdy never came up after the first revision, so him being named after Andre the Black Nerd, it became a lost punchline. Millie didn't really change much. I think the big difference is that we couldn't decide whether she was going to have legs or a dress. I think the dress would have been cool, kind of have this transition from something tangible to something a bit more fog-like. I think that would have been really cool, but it may have also been really effects heavy. I studied how to do effects like that. That was one of my classes, but I remember zippity zap about it. So that's a little bit about the concept art behind making the short, so. So the last major thing I'd like to discuss with this senior short was the communication. So for previous years, the amount of students they would let in was only about 20 to 30 or so. Not a huge number. But I guess there were enough impressive people freshman year that they let in 32 people, and this was the largest class of students. And I think that it's kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you've got a lot more people who can voice more opinions and ideas, but on the other hand, you've also got more likely chances of people who will, intentionally or not, cause damage to the project, and there was at least one guy who was like that. Basically, this guy that, as far as I've heard, no one really liked because he was a pretentious douchebag. He basically said that he didn't really care about the project because I don't know if he'd secured a job or if he just felt that our idea was stupid, but he didn't really put in much effort into it. But he was just one part of why the project didn't work nearly as well as it should have. The other thing was that because we had so many people, the standard senior lab, which held about 24 people, had 24 computers, it was not going to fit all of us, so 8 of us or so, 6 or 8, had to go to another room across the building. Now, this wasn't too far a walk. It's basically just walking by the secretary's desk, walking past the elevators, and it was at the end of the hallway, so it wasn't too far, but apparently it was not terribly convenient because the two labs, we'll call the big one the senior lab and the small one the Arctic lab, which was already its nickname for being so cold. The two very rarely actually directly communicate with each other. We never had any proxies to inform how the projects were going. And that might not be so bad, but the Arctic lab wasn't just one group of people trying to do just one part, like the effects or the texturing or the lighting or something. No, these were people from all the different groups who had no easy way of communicating with the rest of their group. And some of you might be saying, well, didn't you have digital communication? And yes, we did. We actually downloaded the app Slack onto all the computers, and some of us, like myself, our home computers so that we could always be communicating. Now, the problem with that is that for constant communication be available, you need people who constantly communicate. And another sign was that for summer of 2019, where apparently a lot of work had been done, I think other people were never told that there were going to be meetings on campus to discuss the story, to work on stuff, so I came in and was totally unprepared for anything. I was really hoping to still be part of the story team, but they had decided that the people who showed up for summer were good enough, so I was just pushed off to the side. And there was very rarely communication actually done in class. People were just too focused on getting whatever stuff they were told to get done, and that's not something that's easy to do when you don't know what other people are doing. For instance, is Story working on something where they're adding something new to the story or taking something away from the story? And we often didn't find out about that stuff until it was too late, like I said, with all the rooms but the attic and the hallway getting destroyed. And one of the sad things is that I am not one of the most outgoing guys out there. I am honestly very shy. I don't like talking to people. I very rarely try to voice my opinion, and yet somehow I was one of the most vocal people in the class, in the program. And yeah, that's not good when someone who is so shy is the person who is most often instigating communication. the professor should have done something to really encourage us to communicate rather than just hope that we get out of our chairs and go see what other people are doing, because unless we've got some kind of big motivation for it, it's unlikely we're going to do something like that. So yeah, communication was really ineffective, and I think that's what caused the problems with story and assets and all that. I think if we communicate better, the final product would have been really good. I don't know if it would have been amazing, but it would have been something. So if there is a lesson to take away from all of this, it's that when working on a team project, especially with a lot of people, communication is essential. So if you're working on a project where there are a lot of people, make sure that you're communicating. So just to offer some closing remarks, I'm not ashamed to have worked on this project. I'm not angry with anyone who worked on it. I think that all of them, even the douchebag, they're all really talented people. They're some of the most talented people I have ever met in my life, and I'm honored that I could have been able to work with them. I don't think that the professors are bad people. They were, for the most part, extremely encouraging and wanted us to make something that was good. It's just that the final product itself was maybe too many cooks in the kitchen, maybe poor time management. Whatever it was just not the final product it should have been. It was not the senior short that we were hoping to make. If you want to see it, I've left a link in the description, both on the YouTube version and the Vimeo version, so you can check it out. You can also check out links to my other social media sites, such as DeviantArt and Instagram, if you're interested in following me now that I'm done with school. And, thank you very much for watching, and have a nice day, you wonderful people. But, she... This will be edited out. If this hasn't been edited out, Alex, you're an idiot.